If you want to set your exposure like a cinematographer and don't know how to, in this video I am going to show you how I do it. Before we start, this is the gear I am going to use in this video. First, a camera. I'm using the A7 IV. Second, a lens. Third, a ND filter, preferably a variable one. Fourth, a monitor, and if you don't have a monitor, I'm going to share an alternative for it in this video. So without any late, let's get started. There are 4 variables which you can modify to get certain exposure: shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and ND filter. Before you start to fiddle with these, make sure you set these settings. First is the resolution. Anything would work just fine. For this video I'm going to shoot it in 4K. This is the least important setting of all of them. Second, frame rate. Now this setting is very important for setting the shutter speed. I'm going to set it at 25 fps. Third, a picture profile like S-Log 3 or HLG. For this video, I'll set it to S-Log 3. Once you have set these, let's set our exposure. Now to set your shutter speed, I follow 180-degree shutter rule, which is also a film industry standard that basically helps me determine the shutter speed based on the frame rate. This rule is used to create motion blur that mimics how the human eye sees the world. We know our frame rate is 25 fps, so we will set our shutter speed to 1/50th. Now let's set the aperture. Generally, if you are shooting a close-up shot, I'll set my aperture from anywhere between f2.8 to f4.5. This is very subjective and completely depends upon what you are shooting. Better question is, ask yourself, do you prioritize shallow depth of field, meaning you want the most amount of blurred out background and you do not care about how sharp and focused the subject looks? Set it to the lowest f-stop you want. And on the other hand, if you want the most critical focus and don't want to lose the focus of the subject, like if you're shooting a podcast or maybe there are 2 people in a shot, you will obviously need to set your f-stop to a larger number like f6.3 or f8. For this example, I'll set it to f2.8. Now let's set our ISO. I'm shooting in S-Log 3, so my base ISO will be 800. It's not like I can't go below it, but I won't get the most dynamic range out of the camera if I go below 800. I personally like to use the base ISOs only, but there are certain situations when you have to increase or decrease your ISO, but I avoid it as much as possible. The A7 IV has a dual native ISO. One is at 800 and other is at 3200. If you don't know what is native ISO, in short, it's the lowest ISO setting at which the camera sensors operate without any digital amplification, also called as gain. In short, you would get the best dynamic range when you are shooting at your base ISO, and the base ISO is different for all cameras. In Sony cameras, if you go below native ISO, you'll see 2 lines highlighting the ISO setting. I'll set my ISO to 800, which is the base ISO. At this point, I'll use my monitor. If you don't have a monitor, Sony has this incredible app called Monitor and Control, which is available on Play Store and App Store. So you can go ahead and use that app. There are 2 tools in the monitor I use to set exposure accurately. First and the most helpful is waveforms. I'll just turn on the waveform. I am inside the Monitor Control app by Sony. I'm just going to open our waveform first. So if you can't see the waveform, go to the tools and make sure you have turned it on. I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. Basically what the waveform is showing is the brightness value of the whole frame. So 0 being the lowest and 100 being the highest. Anything which goes above 100 or below 0 is going to get clipped. A safer practice to do it is to exposing it to the neutral. So in this waveform, we would like the brightness to be in the middle parts of the waveform. The image is underexposed. So I am just going to increase my ISO. So as you know that A7 IV has the second native ISO at 3200. So I am just going to jump to 3200 directly. And if you can see that the waveform is increased, it's not still in the middle. So what I can do here is I can decrease my aperture. As you can see, I went to f1.8 and the waveform went back. But if I decide to not do 1.8 and I want the subject to be in critical focus, I'll go ahead and go back to f2.8. Second thing I can do is I can increase the ISO. So if I go one stop, which is 6400, now my exposure looks little bit better. and it's in the middle part of the image. This is the second way I can do it. Or I can go back to ISO 3200 and increase the light which is present in the scene. So I am using artificial light. It's set to the lowest power. So what I can do is increase the light, and I'm just going to increase it. I have increased by 10%. As you can see, it looks like this. I'll go ahead and increase it by 10% again. Now, as you can see, it's 30% and the waveform is in the middle part. As we saw, either I can increase the ISO to set my exposure, or second option is I can decrease the f-stop of my aperture and let in more light to increase the exposure, or I can increase the light which is present in the scene. But this cannot be same in all conditions. In an alternative scenario, if you want to decrease your exposure in the waveform, let's say if you have set the lowest ISO possible and you don't want to change your aperture because you want that soft out of focus background, you can change the intensity of the light, but in outdoor conditions that's not an option. So what you can do is you can use a ND filter to decrease the exposure. So what is a ND filter? So ND filter is this. So it's basically a sunglass for your lens. It decreases the overall exposure of your image. So this is a variable ND filter which can be changed. So I can go from 3 stops to around 7 stops. So that much amount of stops this filter decreases. And remember, it decreases the exposure for the whole image. So it does not only affect your shadows or highlight, it applies to the whole image. A common misconception you hear a lot is you have to use ND filters in the sun to decrease the harshness of the sunlight, but it's not entirely true. ND filters do not do anything to the quality of the light in your image. If your scene has hard lighting, ND filter is not going to affect the type of lighting. It's just going to lower your overall exposure. So now you know what ND filters do. Once you achieve the neutral image in your waveforms, you are set for most situations. But you can go one step ahead and make it more accurate. The problem with exposing your image with waveform is you do not truly know how your skin tones look, because if you overexpose or underexpose your skin, it might create inaccurate skin tones, and you don't want to do that. You can do anything to the entire scene, but you do not want to mess up the skin tones. To solve this problem, we have something called false colors in our monitors. False colors is an exposure tool that uses color overlays to represent different brightness levels in an image. This helps us determine exact levels of brightness of a particular area. Like let's say our skin. Now you can see different color overlays on the entire screen. If you see at the left, there is a bar which indicates different percentage of brightness and colors assigned to it. Anything between 40 to 70 is a good place for the skin. It depends on how light or dark the skin is, 70 being for the lightest skin and 40 being for the darkest skin. Generally, Indian skin tones work the best around 55 IRE. Let's see if our skin tones are in that region. As you can see, it's around 30 to as low as 10 IRE. So I need to increase the exposure. I'll go ahead and do it with the ISO. I'll go one stop higher, which is 1600, and now you can see it is in the zone of 40 to 50 IRE. So I'll go ahead and increase it by one stop from 1600 to 3200. So voila. So now the skin is between 50 to 60 IRE. The magenta color basically is showing that it's above 55 IRE, and the darkest point would be the beard, which is around 10 to 20 IRE, which is fine. I'll just turn on the waveform for reference, and as you can see that waveform is not in the neutral position. So the most bright part in the image is around 60 to 70%. This is the thing which I wanted to share, that if I would have overexposed this image, so let's say I would go one stop higher, which is 6400. Now the waveform shows that the image is neutral, but I'll turn off the waveform and you can see that my skin is above 60 IRE, which is not right. My skin would then look a little bit lighter, which you don't want. You want to expose your skin as accurately as possible. So I'll just lower the ISO to 3200 and we are back in our skin tones. With the same method, you can use false colors filters to expose your image and identify different brightness levels in different scenes. To wrap this up, things you should remember is avoid using shutter speed to change your exposure, as it can create unnatural motion in your shots. Second thing you need to remember is I said to use ISO to set your exposure. Just don't crank it too high, as it will create noise in your shots. Like for the A7 IV, I do not go above the second native ISO, which is 3200. Try lowering your aperture or bringing more light into the scene. At first, all this might seem complicated, but to achieve the best possible exposure and create a workflow which helps you get consistent results, I think so for that it is worth the hassle. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.